Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are super excited to be back online, and we have today with us Mike Chi, who is. Oh wait, I have to turn this off. Sorry, Mike Chi, who is a retro gaming celebrity and or legend, I should say. He has done amazing things. He's also a UCSD alum. He got a PhD in ECE. And we also have with us as a co-host Niema Moshiri, since I don't know that much about gaming, especially not retro gaming, but we have Niema here to help us out. Welcome everyone. Is the audio okay? Let's see. Audio testing. Do you folks hear me in the chat? Is it too loud, too soft? Can't see anything. No feedback from the chat. I think we're good. Niema, can you say hello to everyone? Just a quick hello.
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Niema Moshiri. I'm an assistant teaching professor in CSD, and we're excited to have Mike with us. It'll be a fun time.
Let us know if the audio is good. And now, Mike. Drum roll. Hello, Mike. Yes, you introduce yourself, please.
Well, I'm Mike. I was a UCSD grad. Well, I am a UCSD graduate, and I'm very happy to be here with you guys.
All right.
So mine sounds like I'm quiet. I can probably go get my headset.
I think it's okay.
Yeah, let me get my headset.
Wait, let me. Well, okay. Hold on, Niema. I can make you louder. I have little dials here, knobs. I can make you a little bit louder too. I think I can make it louder. Does this little knob? I think. Why don't we try that? Just say a few things, and then maybe I can make myself a little bit quieter. Okay.
It sounds like mine's echoey too, though. So maybe I got my gaming headset. Maybe that'll be a good idea.
Niema sounds like he's in a hobbit hole under a hill. Mike is also quiet, so I'm basically let me make this all a little bit louder.
Here, I'm gonna plug this in. So hold off on mine.
Okay. Apologies, folks. Last minute. So okay. While we do this, okay.
Can folks hear me now?
Is this better? Is this a little bit better? I increased the loudness of the guests.
How about this? Do you guys hear me well?
Better. Okay.
Better.
Someone says better.
I'm quite a bit better. Okay, so that's good.
Wait, yes, they're saying a little loud now. Oh my gosh, this would be like.
Someone says Mike sounds good. Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, folks.
Mike sounds gorgeous.
Mike,
okay, that's good to know.
Let's get started. Give us a quick introduction of your path here. And by the way, I must say your background, is that a Zoom background? Are you using a Zoom background? Is that like, that's
me?
A Zoom background,
no,
right?
Me? This is the back of my room.
Wait, that's a real background? That's like real stuff?
That is a real background. You know, I was never smart enough to figure out how to do this Zoom stuff where it detects your head and then plots something in the back. Never figured it out.
Folks, well, you got an amazing real background there. We'll talk about that in a second, but yeah, give us a quick introduction.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was a graduate student at UCSD in the Department of Electrical Engineering. And towards the end of my graduation, my advisor, Gert, and I said, hey, why don't we start a company? And I was like, well, I got nothing better to do. So we started a company. And we built some stuff, mostly around research equipment for neuroimaging. And that was fun. I did that for about 8 years. And, we built a nice little company. And towards the end of it, it was kind of itchy. You know, you do something for long enough, you feel like you got to do something else, right? At least to take your mind off. And I hadn't played games at that point, probably close to 15 years or something, many years. And I was like, I really want to play those old games I did as a kid. And I suspect that's a feeling that many of us had of my age had at about that time. And I'm like, well, how am I going to do it? And then I started looking into it, and it's like, oh man, CRTs and so on and so forth. So I got some CRTs, I got a Raspberry Pi, and I built this Pi hat, which converted the signals from the Pi to an analog output that you could connect to a CRT. And I was happy playing that for like a year. And that was cool. Then I dug a little bit deeper. It's like, well, I want to play it with the original hardware. How do I do that? And then I found a video chip, a pretty simple one from Analog Devices. And I built this little kit that converted the analog video from the consoles in a way that didn't distort them too badly and let you hook it up to the modern HD TVs we have now. And people are like, oh my God, this is really cool. You should sell this. and I sold this hokey looking little kit, and that got a lot of interest. And I was like, hey, this is pretty fun. Like, I like building this stuff. And then slowly we improved our products, and here we are today.
That's amazing. By the way, so CRT, what is a CRT again?
CRT is cathode ray tube. That's what we're looking on back there, and the big glass things that are super heavy and big.
Are those all cathode ray tubes behind you?
Yes, that's right.
And by the way, oscilloscopes used to use those too, right? Do modern oscilloscopes still use cathode ray tubes? Probably not, right? They're all like...
No. Modern oscilloscopes, kind of like TVs, have migrated to all digital technology with an LCD because there's just so many advantages. You can store the signal instead of viewing it at real time and then zoom in, go back and forth. So scopes haven't used CRTs in many years. And, same for consumer video. We've kind of given up on that because for the most part, I'm sure I'm about to get a lot of hate when I said this, for the most part, for 90% plus of applications, CRTs are just not that great. Modern tech is a lot better. For playing this retro stuff, that's a different story.
So like what's wrong with the retro stuff on modern displays?
Well, modern displays are complicated beasts, and that's one side of it. They want to do a lot of processing to make the image look good because that's what consumers want. And of course, the manufacturers are going to design it to try and accommodate what most consumers are using it for, which is broadcast video, VCRs, home video. That's the use case that they expect a typical consumer with legacy analog devices to be connecting it to. These video game consoles outputted a different signal. They weren't exactly on spec, and in the loosey-goosey analog days, that was okay. But it really trips up how these modern devices process them. And of course, the manufacturers don't care because we are a relatively small niche market case. It just doesn't make sense for them to focus on us.
Folks, I know I'm a little bit green. It's because the sunlight just came in. Usually I'm not used to this, so everything got messed up with my green screen and the filter. I'll be fine. Don't worry. I'm not getting sick. I'm just it's just. By the way, but so let me ask you a question about retro gaming. When we talk about retro gaming, what is retro gaming? Like when is a game retro? Is it just everything that's not HDMI is retro gaming, or how does one think about that?
Gosh, I think you opened a can of worms. That's a loaded question, right? What is retro? How old are you?
Yeah, I know.
There's been discussions I just see popping up here and there, like every few days. It's like, well, what do you consider retro? And, for old people, it's like the Nintendo, right? Anything newer than the original Nintendo, that's modern. Whereas for younger folks, well, PS3 might be retro. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
But from your perspective, though, retro gaming, a lot of what you care about is the fact that they're somehow not connected to HDMI, right? If they have an HDMI,
that's correct.
From your perspective, if it's not HDMI output, then it's a console that you will do something with. Like you have some good stuff to help with, right? If the output HDMI, then in some sense, you don't need to connect it to your stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. And from the perspective of a hardware maker, I think retro is just pre-HDMI. Post HDMI, you can plug it into a modern display and have a great experience, even if it's 10, 15 years old, because the standard hasn't changed that much. And modern displays do a pretty good job of handling HDMI type resolutions.
Okay,
for the most part.
So hold on. So now. So it seems like basically if you just have a console that does not have HDMI, you can plug it into some modern TVs, but there's bad ways of doing the conversion. So you gave us an amazing video. Should we look at this video and see what it looks like when you do a bad conversion, and then what it looks like when Mike G does it? Is that good?
Yeah, sure thing. And give a little context, it was just a quick video that I made for you guys that demonstrates, if you just plug in to the regular cables you have with your console to your TV, if it still has the analog ports, or a really simple converter that you could buy, from Walmart or whatever, versus a nice video scaler, whether it's a RetroTINK or an OSSC, which is another device out there that's really good, or a FrameMeister, with good quality RGB cables, it shows you the difference doing it the fancy way versus the naive way.
So on the left is the bad way, and on the right is the good way. And even at normal speed, this is normal speed. Like the difference is, I don't know if you folks can see it in the video, but to me, it's so clear that there's a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, the left one's like blurry even.
Yeah, the left one's horrible.
Yeah.
What do people think? Dude, I shouldn't have told you which one was Mike's and which one was you. Should have let the people on the chat. Yeah, you could tell, right? So, but actually, you can definitely tell. So, maybe Mike? What do you want? Do you want to just comment a little bit on this, or do you want me? Whoa, it's over. Let me replay it. Or should
why don't we play it quarter speed?
Maybe quarter speed is good.
Okay, let me.
And maybe also like what goes into this. So like, what does yours do differently that these other devices don't do?
Okay, I'm doing it. I'm doing it quarter speed now. So let's see. Okay. While you answer,
I was going to say, at the core, it's really doing the same thing: video conversion and scaling. It's just what algorithms, what methods you apply that favors video gaming, which major manufacturers don't necessarily care about, nor should we expect them to, versus a form that is optimized for video games. Yeah, so if you look at the example, I mean, the most immediate thing I think to your eyes is just how blurry the left is. And that's largely due to the nature of the connection, which is composite video. And that's not really at that point, that's not even really a matter of the device itself. It's just a lower quality form of video connection. But if you look at how the video is scaled and moves, you can see the left side, it just jumps up and down. It's blurry. And you see these weird teething artifacts. And that at its core is really because the video processors built in your TVs or the ones you buy off the shelf, they're designed to handle interlaced broadcast video, which is the standard for how analog video was handled. But these game consoles use a variant of that was off spec, and that fools these video converters. That's why you get all these weird artifacts that distort the game and add a lot of lag, which the lag is not something you can see through the video, but that obviously messes up the gameplay. Whereas a converter that's designed for video games would detect this video format correctly and apply, the video scaling methods that would favor this and not distort the signal.
So in addition to like distortion, I think I remember hearing that the RetroTINK can also handle some like weird resolution stuff that old consoles do. So like, what about that stuff?
Yeah, that's the heart of it. So broadcast analog video uses something called 480i, 480 interlace lines, which scans the fields like this. The consoles output a progressive form, which is called 240p, and that could have actually 262 lines, 263 lines, 264 lines. It violated the standards. Engineers in the analog days just kind of could do a lot of abuse, and analog electronics are pretty tolerant of that, and it was fine. No one complained because it worked with all our TVs. But as you go towards more modern devices, standards get much more strict. And modern equipment wasn't really necessarily designed to handle these niche edge cases that didn't follow the formula, and that's where you get all these problems.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So let's maybe we can stop the video. Hold on, let's come back to this view here. So how do you actually do all this stuff? Is it like hardware? Is it software? Is it a combination of the two? Like what is the thing that you actually build? And
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixed signal processing system. So you've got the hardware, which is at its core an ADD converter to convert the analog signal to the digital domain, and that gets sent to an FPGA, which obviously does everything digitally. Applies some relatively simple digital signal processing, probably a lot simpler than what you guys do in your department. But again, just done in a way that's correct for games. And all that's done in the digital domain on the FPGA, which then scales the image up to high definition resolutions, 1080p usually. And that sends it to a hardware device, an HDMI chip, then goes through the cable, then to your TV. So I'd say it really, what I really enjoyed about it is, you really see the entire spectrum. You work with a little bit with analog signals. You have to pre-process it a little bit. That's all some analog engineering. And then you get into digital design. Then to control that, you have to write some firmware for the microprocessor in C. And so there's a little bit of software development too. So you kind of see a bit of everything.
So you have like a pretty advanced education, right? I mean, you have a bachelor's degree, you have a PhD. Like, how did your coursework, how did your background kind of all come into play for this? Like, what skills do you use from your education? How did it prep you for this?
I think, I like to say I know a lot about stuff, enough to be dangerous, but I definitely don't know in depth about any one thing. So, compared to, just give you an example, right? I know a little bit about video processing, so I can hack together some simple algorithms for scaling video games, but definitely I wouldn't call myself an image processing engineer, right? I don't know the state of the art in the field that, people in your department would do. And that's kind of been my background. Is I was just lucky to just take a bunch of classes in as many different fields as possible and just gain these little toolboxes and be able to put it together. And, I think the one thing nice about this device is that it really didn't require a huge amount of depth in any one specific field, but it was really more of a systems integration thing.
That's awesome. Yeah.
By the way, but did you have to learn about all the kind of the HDMI kind of like signal formats and all that stuff, just the details of what these formats actually really mean? Presumably there's some documentation. You have to read all that stuff, or do you just use off the shelf kind of elements that do that kind of stuff for you?
Well, it depends. So on the input side, which is handling these analog signals, I had to go pretty deep into it because I'm dealing with a physical signal, and there aren't really off-the-shelf parts that handle it as well. On the HDMI side, I bought an off-the-shelf HDMI chip, and I followed the instructions. For an individual to actually create all that by scratch is just impossible.
Right, that makes sense.
I'm going to ask a question that might be blasphemous to some of the folks in the chat, but it looks like kind of the output that you get looks a lot like what I would get with an emulator. So kind of what's the trade-off? Like why do people play with modern, like with original hardware on these modern displays?
Wait. Can I ask before? What is an emulator for those folks who are like a little bit challenged with these things? So what is an emulator versus what you're doing? So what's the difference there? And then why would you not use an emulator?
Okay, I'll answer your question in two parts, because I think you raised a good question you raised a very good question. The first is, well, why does it look like an emulator? I think that is a visual aesthetic that many people are interested in, and that's one of the visual aesthetics that the 5X can produce. It can sample the analog signal precisely and basically produce something close to what an emulator would, with some analog noise, of course. And that was the easiest demo to show because it's very clean and simple. But the other side is emulating the look of old CRT, and that we didn't see because those video processing effects are much harder to show across across streams. So that's another whole can of worms. There are video processing functions on the 5X that actually go the other direction. How do we make it distort it to make it look like an old analog display? And there's a whole slew of options for that. Now, why wouldn't you play on an emulator? Well, first of all, I'd say 95% of the world probably do play on emulators, and that's completely fine. If if it gets them into enjoying these old games, that's great. Now, why that's a disadvantage? Well, for emulation, up to a certain generation, I would say the Super Nintendo, there are very good emulators, that are very precise, that have very low latency depending on the platform, and those are great ways to play. I would say the reason why people don't want to play emulators is twofold. First, some people just have to have the original hardware, and I respect that. You want to play on the exact devices that you had as a kid, perhaps the exact same console, the very same one that you had, right? That's a certain experience that people want. The other one is, I would say PlayStation and Nintendo 64 and afterwards, the emulators for those systems aren't necessarily as developed as previous generations. So the original hardware really is by far the most accurate way to play.
But just because, so emulators, like when you have like a Nintendo Wii, Nintendo Switch or something, and the Switch somehow on its hardware has a way of running the bytecode or the source code of some other game. But does that can they actually make that work? Is that because I remember like when in compiler optimizations they had these kind of translators and they would like translate from one assembly to the other, and it would work most of the time. But sometimes like things were glitchy. I mean, Niema, does this stuff work actually? Can you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about the technical details about that kind of stuff. I don't know if Mike is more of an expert, but I mean, emulation has gotten quite good nowadays. But yeah, I mean, as Mike said, there's always kind of like, you can have video artifacts, you can have like incompatibility issues, you can have some games that just like straight up don't work properly sometimes. I mean, most recently, I remember there was some outrage briefly with Nintendo's online stuff with the Ocarina of Time emulation, where like there was all these kinds of graphical bugs that had been fixed for like decades in modern other emulators. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that there's kind of pros and cons, and it's just kind of what each person prefers. But yeah, I mean, emulation's gotten pretty good, but still not quite the original hardware.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, honestly, and people just really want to play on the original systems, which is kind of the camp I'm in. I want to touch the original hardware. I want to have the carts. That's an experience you can't exactly fully replicate on emulator.
Yeah, so actually someone mentions in the
absolutely.
chat too that there's an issue with if you have specialized hardware, right? Like with the Wii. I mean, if you have like specialized hardware, the motion sensing and all that stuff, the emulation is very hard to do for that kind of stuff, right? You have the Wii controllers and all that, the original Wii console, right, and the controllers and all that stuff. By the way, so
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Let's switch gears entirely, because this is, to me, I think of this as your superhero job. But you also do like others. You do like this whole other thing about like what is it even, bio stuff or bio hardware things? What is that about?
Yeah, that's kind of that was basically the bulk of what I was doing at UCSD. Brain sensors, EEG. So it's pretty simple stuff, all things considered. It's just little probes on your head that measure the voltage on your scalp, and it just produces a bunch of squiggly lines. Pretty useful for both basic science research as well as some medical applications. And our company just builds headsets that let you collect that data really fast.
Oh, cool. And so you actually build all the hardware that collects the stuff and then translates it to some kind of signal of some sort, right?
Yeah, well, I would say I built the electronics to do it. I honestly think at this point of my company's life cycle, most of the hard work's done by the mechanical engineers. They're always doing stuff in SolidWorks and making fancy shapes and classics and whatever. I don't understand it. It's beyond me.
Me too.
But that's amazing. So, but yeah, there's a company, right? And but wait a minute. But this is like with humans, right? So is there like, is there some can you just put these things on humans to just do, or are there like approvals that you get from the government, or how does that work?
The basic sensor technology is really non-invasive because nothing is being put in your head, no energy is being delivered. If you use this at the university, which is most of our market application, you typically have to get an IRB. For cool. This stuff, it's pretty simple.
But you have to get. But is there any FDA clearance or anything like that you have to get, or does that not apply for these kind of devices?
It does if you're using it in a clinical setting where a physician is using it with the idea of diagnosing patients. And we just got FDA clearance on one of our products, I think late last year. That was fun.
How long does that take?
That took us probably 2 years. I was the unfortunate guy that had to do the documentation for the software. And imagine just writing tons and tons of Doxygen stuff and justifying why you had to use an int instead of a float, and why a float won't overflow and cause your thing to crash and kill people, which is good stuff. Which is completely good stuff if you're building things that are on life support. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking on it, but it was a lot of work, and documentation was probably 90% of it. And not the biggest fan of documentation.
But so it sounds like it's more than just documentation, right? It's documentation, but also there's justifying the safety of these things, which is not just, this function does this, which is what sometimes you might be used to when you're writing code in other settings. This is like justifying that this will not kill anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's go back to, by the way, so it seems like you now have two companies, right? The gaming stuff, and then you also have this kind of the what is it? EEG? Is that what they're called?
EEG, yeah.
The EEG stuff. So what about entrepreneurship? I mean, some people actually were saying they want to hear about that kind of. It seems like how do you go about? I mean, yeah, you have some experience doing this stuff, so maybe you can just tell people a little bit about that.
That's a good question, and I think I have to give the community and environment at UCSD a lot of credit. When I was a student, I think this was in the early, like late 2000s, early 2010s. As a grad student, there were a lot of resources. There was a program called the Entrepreneur Challenge. I'm not sure if it's still there. There's the Von Liebig Center. A lot of good resources that just kicking you and giving you at least an idea of how to start a business, how to run a business, connecting you with mentors. And I got a little bit of seed capital from those entities as well. So I was very lucky to be at UCSD to start this. And Howdy did it. Well,
wait, hold on. You started the company while you were at UCSD?
Yeah, as a grad student,
And
my professor and I did it.
the gaming one too?
No, the gaming one came much later. I started let's call it the real company. The real company started in 2010, last year of grad school. My professor and I started it. The gaming stuff I wouldn't even call that a real company. That's just something my wife and I run out of. Yeah, it's basically my wife and myself running it out of the house. We started that 3 years ago.
What does your advisor, your PhD advisor, say?
I don't know if Gert's listening. He probably thinks it's rather silly. I'm sure he'd rather me work on EEG headsets, which is fine. It's completely fair.
But you're working on both. You're working on.
I'm still working on both.
Yeah, yes. You're working on both. But we should be careful not to the the people in the chat. They're like, no, keep doing your. How dare you not do your gaming stuff? That's like we depend on it. So going back to the gaming stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the future. So future of tech in the gaming world. Or in the retro gaming world, like what are the kind of so right now you do have your latest hardware. What is the future of tech, and is there a point at which we're gonna need like 20-30 years from now basically a retro thing that's going to be like, oh, this thing is outputting HDMI. We need a special converter because like no TVs will take HDMI anymore, right? So can you tell us a little bit about where you see things going in the near future and the long-term future?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the long-term one because actually I think that might be easier to predict. Well, to answer your first question about HDMI, I'm actually somewhat optimistic. So analog video is still used, and I think it came out in the late 40s, early 50s. We still have devices that support it. And the nice thing about HDMI is that it's very well documented. It's very well standardized. So I predict, in the coming decades, we'll have converters that still let you convert HDMI to whatever we need, all in the digital domain without loss and without fuss. Because, I guess the engineers decided to start taking standards seriously and start cracking down. So now we understand what we're doing. In terms of retro in the long term, if we're looking at 30, 40 years away, I think these tubes are dead. I think our consoles are going to be dead. I think that's just a reality. You can't beat entropy. And I think we're all going to be playing on some sort of emulators. And I think these emulators are going to be amazing. And I think whatever display tech we're going to have is going to be amazing at recreating this because they're going to have infinite dynamic range, infinite refresh rate, and all that good stuff. And we'll have infinite processing power compared to what we have today. If we look at the near term, it's hard to say. I think one cool thing is that this has been a thriving cottage industry. So I expect to see a lot of very interesting things come out on all sorts of sides that keep the stuff going. For me personally, I think the big jump would be to build a 4K type scaling device. Currently, what we have today are 1080p resolutions, and that in the consumer AV world is probably a decade out of date, but we're just hobbyists, we're cottage industries. We have to use simpler tools. To get there though, that's a monumental, I would say that's an order of magnitude more complex than what we're doing today.
Really? So why is that?
Yes.
Yeah, tell me a little bit, because that's interesting, why it's not just additional scaling to go to 4K.
Well, I think the answer is in the hardware complexity needed to process 4K signals, to output 4K signals. At 1080p resolutions, you can buy off-the-shelf HDMI chips that do all the hard work for you. At 4K resolutions, because the signals are so fast, you have to build the transmitter on the FPGA chip itself. So now, instead of a simple $15 FPGA that a noob can work with, you're looking at $200 FPGAs that require very expensive, complex tools. And of course, Intel and Xilinx, they're not going to support a scrub like me, right? They're just like, if I call their support, like, you're wasting our time. Don't talk to us. And you're stuck rolling very complex FPGA HDMI transmitters on the FPGA itself instead of buying a canned off-the-shelf chip that does all the hard work. So that's really the hard part.
But let me ask you this: why can't you convert to HDMI to 1080p and then have an off-the-shelf? Aren't there off-the-shelf converters that do 1080p to 4K? Somehow get an off-the-shelf chip. There's no such thing. Absolutely.
So you can buy an off-the-shelf chip that takes 1080p to 4K and whatever. The problem though is the exact same thing we have going from analog video to 1080p. These chips are optimized for movies. So they won't scale the image in a way that is favorable for games. And they certainly won't be able to apply the special effects that you want. The big reason why you want 4K output capability is because then you can really start emulating these old tubes. You have more detail, so you can replicate the structure that made CRTs unique. To do that, you have to do very custom video processing. So you can't really get an off-the-shelf chip that does that, because no one's going to, the big companies that make these chips aren't going to invest millions of dollars to build a game emulator or a game display technology emulator.
Is that kind of, now that you mentioned that, is that kind of, I remember I saw that new handheld device that came out. I'm blanking on what it was called, but that I think it had like 4x the resolution of, shoot, I think it was 4x. But yeah, it was like emulating yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, you must mean the analog pocket. So that's a really nifty device that is for emulating, handheld games. And they spend a lot of R&D in mimicking the pixel response of these old LCDs, which are a lot crappier than the nice ones we have today. And they got a very high resolution display in order to pull that off. And it's kind of the same idea for this stuff, right? If you have the higher resolution display you have, the higher the refresh rate, the higher dynamic range, then you can more easily and more accurately emulate other types of older displays.
That's really interesting. So, by the way, it seems like a lot of people love your stuff, Mike. I mean, seriously, they're like praising all of the conversions that you're doing. But when you do it and you're doing your stuff, how do you know that? Do you just play the game and say, oh, this looks good or this looks better? Or do you run it? Like, how do you even know like you did a good job?
That's a good question. And I think you kind of hit something, you touched on something that was very interesting. Play the game. Do any of us play it's become kind of a joke that no one really plays the game anymore, just sitting there tweaking settings and trying to make sure your setup works. And by the time you've spent hours doing that, you've forgotten to play the game and it's time to go to bed. In more seriousness, there's ways objectively you can measure that you're doing the right thing. And the big one is lag. The big problem with off-the-shelf converters right now is lag, right? If you have too much delay from when you push a button and when something happens on the screen, what us double E's call is too much phase lag leads to an unstable system. It blows up and it ruins the gaming experience. You can measure, there are very scientific tools to measure lag. And that's the first thing you do is when you build these converters, you make sure that the lag is under a frame or under half a frame, under a fourth of a frame. A CRT is zero lag.
Wait, but hold on. You said you measure this. There are tools. What do you mean by tools? You mean like there's a software tool, a hardware tool, there's a hardware gizmo? What do you mean by a tool? I'm trying to understand because I'm not very. For me, a tool is like a debugger, but it's for you like there's hardware, software. So what is the tool?
Yeah, there's the low-tech way, which is take a high-resolution camera or iPhone camera at 240 frames per second, and you connect the signal directly to a CRT as well as through your converter to an LCD and just measure how many frames those two are off. And that gives you an estimate.
Wait, what? Hold on. Stop. So you put the two things side by side, the CRT and then but hold on. You have to split the output, right? So the output's going to go both into, split the output. One goes to the CRT through, basically there's a directly the wires are. What are they called? Component? Is that it?
Yeah, component, composite, SVD, it doesn't matter.
Whatever those wires are. And then the other one, you pass it through your little gizmo, and then it goes to an LCD screen. And then you take a camera, and then you just make a video, and then you know how many frame rates, what the frame rate for that thing is. Then you start looking literally frame by frame, how many frames there, and you're assuming, and how do you, but wait, you do that manually? Do you look at, or can you automatically process the video then to compute the frame rate, the difference in the frame?
That's simple enough to do manually because each frame is 16 milliseconds. So you roughly say, oh, it's under a frame, which is good, or oh man, it's between 2 to 3 frames, or 5 frames, which some converters do 4 to 5 frames. That's terrible. That's kind of loosey goosey. It's great for a sanity check. The scientific way to do it is with a custom device that outputs a video signal and has a photodiode that you hold up to the screen. So the device knows when it's sent the signal to the display, and it knows when it's received the response to the photodiode, and you get a very scientific number, 3.25 milliseconds.
And for the CRT, what is that number? Is it 0?
It depends on where on the screen. So at the top of the CRT, it should be 0. On the bottom, it's going to be the max is 16 milliseconds. But for all intents and purposes,
it takes time to kind of trace the whole thing.
Exactly. But that's the ground truth that you call 0, right? And you subtract that against what you see on an LCD, and that's your lag.
But none of these sound particularly automated, right? Or I should say, like, let's say you change something, you make your thing a little bit better. Then how do you know? Do you actually have to do this again for, like, do you try it out on different games, or is it once you do the lag test on one game, it's fine? Like, it doesn't matter on which console you try it with, or do you have to test out 5 different consoles to do lag, or if you just do one console, it's fine?
No, it's actually the reason why it's not really automated is because it's really only a measurement you need to do once, and it's only inherent to the video processor, not the signal or console you're feeding it.
Got it.
And at the end of the day, the lag is just basically where you point the read and write buffers. It's basically the difference between the read and write pointers in your circular buffer. So deterministically, in the code itself what it should be. The measurement is just a sanity check.
Oh,
Do different TVs have different like delays as well? Because I know like there's game mode, but I'm assuming game mode on one TV is not the same as on another one. How does that impact things?
Absolutely. So there's like whole websites of video file nuts that measure lag on different TVs, what processing mode you do. So that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse because that's nothing that we can control. The video processor can only it tries to minimize the delay in that step. And then you obviously want to get a display with the lowest latency possible and the lowest processing mode possible. But the reason why the video processor is important is because if you connect an analog signal directly to a modern display, you're forced into the largest lag mode, which could be 4 or 5 frames. Whereas if you pre-process it and send a digital signal, then you have access to the display's low latency modes.
But hold on, so the lag is one thing, but when you showed us the Mario clip where there was like I don't know what do you call that, jitter or what I don't know, but anyways it looked horrible. There was one that looked horrible and the other one looked good. That's not lag issues, right? Those are kind of quality of the pixel, quality of the image. So or what does that? Do you have a way of figuring that out?
Yeah, the reason why the image looked so badly, call it the naive way or the bad way, is twofold. First, it was using composite video, which is a very crummy form of analog video compression. So off the bat, you've lost a lot of detail. The second reason why it was so jumpy and bad is because the video processor off the shelf is designed to handle broadcast video, which is interlaced. And it thinks the console is also sending an interlaced video, which it's not really. And it's applying the incorrect form of video processing that causes it to jump up and down.
But how do you figure out? Okay, I see. So you're saying that for figuring out the image quality, there's not that there's not that much to do, as long as you've done the processing right.
There's two sides of it. The scientific thing, that's a good question. The scientific side is, how do you know you're not creating false deinterlacing artifacts? And there's a very brilliant guy called Artemio who creates the 240p test suite, which is literally the only game I actually play. And there's a very specific set of video test patterns. And if you see these artifacts, then you know the video processor isn't handling it correctly.
You mean what you see as in like you manually run the thing?
Yeah, with the eyes.
You see if I got it. Okay.
Yep. That's one side of it. The second side is you kind of throw it to the masses, right? You have a lot of it's community driven. You got, at least for me, is hey, I release a set of filters. Does this look good, bad, yes, no? And I kind of slowly iterate. And the interesting thing is, fashions change. I would say up till very recently, people were really into the very, very sharp emulator look. And over the past year, the shift has been more towards how do we recreate the CRT look, which is softer and has a more of a texture to it. So basically, and that's very subjective.
Wait, so basically you're saying just make it look not, it's almost like you're just trying to simulate the imperfections of the original.
That's absolutely true. It's more of an artistic thing. It's kind of like you're trying to recreate, analog guitar amps or vinyl. It's a very subjective thing, but it kind of and what is in vogue changes from year to year. But that's another side of it.
So, by the way, I should point out the chat, folks. Feel free to ask questions if you want. We're happy to take things. So, by the way, the other thing is there's different consoles, different resolutions, different things. I mean, we were talking about. So, is that something you need to also try out various different resolutions, or how does that work?
That is also a very good question. So, if you look at the really, really old games, those are all 240p. And that's requires one set of video processing algorithms. As you get more modern, you get consoles that are actually outputting a higher, or I guess it's really the same resolution, but perceptually it's higher resolution, called 40i, which is closer to broadcast video, and that requires a different set of algorithms that deinterlace the video in a form that's displayable on modern TVs. So that's a different that's a different skill set. And along with that, you have to handle switching between these resolutions, because some games switch between different modes. And if that's not done correctly, then that causes blackouts, which can ruin the gameplay, depending on what you're playing.
Wait, so they actually they switch during gameplay from one resolution to another?
Yep.
Wow. By the way, what about audio? Speaking of blackouts, I don't know why when you said blackout, I thought about audio.
I'm definitely not an audio guy. I know nothing about it.
But okay, but hold on. But so then do you do any audio? So wait, does the audio? What do you do with the audio? Or is that not a challenge? You just convert that directly to the speakers of the TV, or
I would say there's definitely some things you could do with audio. Although I would say that audio in general is less of a pain point than video, because audio is relatively simple. You sample things at 41 kilohertz or 48 kilohertz, and you really can't go wrong. If you just want to digitize audio and pass it through, obviously there are some special effects that you could do if you wanted to, but there hasn't been as much of a demand for it. So on my side, I take absolutely no credit. I hook it up to an A to D, and I hook up the output of the A to D to the HDMI chip. It doesn't even go through the FPGA.
I see, got it. So you just have, so basically they're off-the-shelf solutions that you can just take, and they actually they work quite well. Let's see. So what language? By the way, what language do you use for these things in the FPGA?
FPGA is basically Verilog. That's the only language I know. The microprocessor is all programmed in C.
So it's C and Verilog.
Yep.
Do folks in the chat know what C and Verilog are? I don't know. I can't see the chat right now. There's C, so basically C. So they're both very low-level languages, right?
Yeah, to double E like me, I'd say C is pretty high level. I'm happy.
Oh.
Yeah, I was gonna say low and high level is kind of the eye of the beholder.
Sorry, yeah, I apologize in the software level, C is very low level. But when you're looking at things from the point of view of the hardware, I totally agree. C is totally very high level, especially when you look at Verilog.
C has so many luxuries. Every time I'm like, this is awesome.
By the way, Verilog, is that something that do students learn Verilog in the undergrad CS major? Is there a class that teaches them Verilog?
I think Tayana's class does, or I think is that CSE 130 maybe potentially? Ooh, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm mistaken. Whoa. People in the chat might be able to correct me.
Folks, we have a question in the chat. Let's see. CSE 140L.
140L.
Cool.
Nice. Okay.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. With the limitation in storage on the FPGA size on the TINK for firmware features, etc., would it be possible to use a micro USB adapter to USB for extra access for storage to add extra features, or is it read-only?
Unfortunately not, because the USB is a peripheral only. So USB devices are either hosts or peripherals, so there's no facility to be a host on this one.
Interesting. Yeah. So I guess, so there was a question that was earlier in the chat that I thought was kind of interesting, but what do you think is the next step for the RetroTINK? So are you more interested in kind of improving the resolution to 4K? Are you more interested in maybe an intermediary resolution? Are you interested in new features, but at the same resolution? Kind of what are your interests?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the most immediate thing is I still think there's a lot of stuff that can be done on the current hardware platform. So there's, other features that I think can and should be added. So I'm always trying to see how far I can push it. in terms of resolution, I mean, the current platform has been hacked to go to 2560 by 1440, which is actually right in between, 1080p and 4K, which is a nice happy medium because it does provide a nice jump in detail and sharpness. So that's been nice. But, a bit longer term, I would definitely like to do a true 4K device. But again, I think the technology hurdle is pretty big, and as is the cost, because you're going to something, again, a $15 FPGA to something that's at least $150. That's just for one chip. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to end up with a very expensive device, and a very expensive device calls for a very expensive case that looks very nice, that's designed by a real ID firm, and a fancy user interface. So all that starts piling it on, which increases development time and cost. And at some point you have to consider, is this actually a viable product? And I'm not sure yet.
By the way, people are telling you, Mike, that they would like you to combine the two companies and beam the game directly into your brain. That way you don't even need like a display. It's just like connects directly to your brain. That's a big one though.
That is a big one. And as a brain guy, or a brain hardware sort of guy, and not really a neuroscientist, my two words is, don't be the first guy to sign up for something like this. you don't want to be the first guy.
That's great. There's a cool question in the chat though that would be cool to talk about. So someone asked, like, could you give an example of a challenging technical problem that you came across while doing R&D for either company? Just like something in the problem solving mind of Mike Chi.
Problem solving mind. That's a good question. One of the things that, if I had to be honest, looking back at everything I've done, I'm more of a systems integration guy. I can't really say that came up with something, oh my gosh, this is like completely out of the blue, completely new. I've been pretty good at taking existing ideas and modifying them and integrating them to solve problems that haven't necessarily had solutions yet. I would say the one, I don't know if this is a great answer. I would say the one thing that I really like to do is to take bits and pieces from, different fields and use them in novel ways. And I'll give you I'll give an example that I think that's relevant to both companies. Analog video, color video, composite video is a very clever way to superimpose color on a black and white signal, so that in the 1950s, you didn't make everyone's black and white TV obsolete. And the way it did that was using by something called quadrature amplitude modulation, a carrier wave at a very specific frequency inside the black and white signal. So you could carry both in the same bandwidth, and you just filter and recover. About 10 years ago at my company, the Brainwave company, we wanted to carry both the EEG signal, which is the signal you're measuring from the brain, as well as the contact quality, which is impedance, right? So measuring the resistance between the probe and the skin, because that tells you how well the probe's on. I was like, well, how do you carry both without needing more bandwidth or more data? So I modulated the impedance in the same way, using quadrature amplitude modulation at a very high frequency, overlaid on top of the EEG. And I used the exact same idea from composite video, and that worked out really great. It was a very efficient and simple use that turned out to be a pretty big selling point for our products.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just always so satisfying when you find like an elegant solution that just no one thought of connecting the two things, but just kind of, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one thing that I think is really, I don't know if this is unsolicited advice, but, as a student, it pays to just try to learn about as much as you can about everything. And you don't have to be an expert. You don't even have to really remember all the details. You just kind of have to remember it exists, because that's another tool in your toolbox that could be useful 10 years from now.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, the thing that I really like about your story is just how I mean, you basically, from, ECE PhD student to kind of this kind of life of having the bio kind of the brainwave company and the retro gaming thing. It's just such a cool and awesome career path, and kind of seeing how that education that you got kind of goes into and shapes you in a particular way. It's just really awesome and really exciting. So we have some questions. Don't look at the chat, Mike. Don't look at the chat. You're not allowed to. Don't.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you're looking at the chat. I know what you're doing. Some folks are asking questions. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the convergence of BCI and gaming?
Gosh, I'm about to go into a rant now. If you
wait, no,
want me to answer that
hold
question.
on. Wait, what is BCI again?
Brain-computer interface. So it's basically
hold on.
You know,
Mike, but this will be the last question before we do the rapid fire. So don't let's do a 1 minute timeout on it. I know you can go on a rant, but hold on. So basically, so you're saying brain-computer interface to basically control the game, kind of thing, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's hear it. Wow, that is actually okay.
I'm gonna go on a rant because there's just so much snake oil out there. You know, in the 70s or the 80s, there was some Atari device that was a headband that measured muscle activity, electrical pulses. It's the same thing as it's the same fundamental sensor tech as EEG, and they try to connect it to these old consoles, and it didn't work out because it was crappy. And every 5-10 years, people try to do the same thing, and they're like, "Oh my God, we're going to raise $100 million to do brain-computer interfaces, and we're going to change how you control stuff with surface electrodes on the head." Fundamentally, you just don't have the SNR because the skull is such a great attenuator of the signals from your brain. Surface brain waves can be used for long-term diagnosis, sleep, right? You're measuring signals over a very long period of time, and that's how you overcome low SNR. But to control something requires accurate, fast responses. And I'm sorry, sensing surface signals on the surface of your skin is just not as good as using your hands and buttons. I think it could be a great use case for people that are unfortunately disabled, right? They could control things at very slow rates, and that could be a life changer. But for your average gamer, you're gonna get pissed off and frustrated how shitty this thing works. But yet every few years you see people saying, "Oh my God, we've got revolutionary BCI technology." And I'm just like, oh my God. Anyways, that was my rant.
By the way, they also do the eye tracking, right? That's another one where they do
eye track. Yep.
So recently we actually bought an eye tracker for research purposes to do studies with eye tracking. But it's interesting. So I actually tried it out, not in a gaming setup, but in a kind of another setup. But it's actually quite interesting and pretty accurate. It's surprising how for the cheap, these are cheap now. I mean, cheap ones. I mean, they have really fancy ones too, but it is very interesting. Okay, so now with that, I think it is time to go to our rapid fire questions. Mike, are you ready for it?
Sure.
Get done.
So this is gonna be really hard. The first one is Sega or Nintendo?
Ooh.
Definitely Nintendo. I put Sega on this one just because it was already connected.
By the way, someone in the chat said, by the way, so wait, someone in the chat, what was it in the chat? They said Genesis, was it? So basically in the chat, they said both. The right answer is both. But okay, so wait, you said Nintendo. By the way, do you still play games now on your things, or you're just at the point where you just test them? You're like, it's work for you.
I honestly don't have the opportunity to play much games these days.
Now you're just testing
mostly work. Yeah, mostly it's work. Like I said, the only game I play with a regular basis is what's called 240p Test Suite, made by a very brilliant guy that produces very accurate test images that you could study. Games, not so much.
Okay, tabs or spaces?
Oh, tabs. Yeah, spaces drive me crazy. If I see spaces in my source code, I get really, really angry.
By the way, does it also in Verilog too? You're upset about the spaces? It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, except the IDEs for HDF for hardware development are complete crap compared to what you guys have in the software world. Complete crap.
Wait, what do you mean the IDE? You can't use like VS Code or something like that for Verilog?
I'm not sure if it's really set up to recognize the quirks of Verilog. And yeah, just in general, the software tool chains for FPGA development is just like 20 years behind software. Like seriously, they're really bad.
Okay, speaking of the software development chain, you mentioned to us that you program in Verilog and you program in C. Mm-hmm. Verilog or C?
Oh yeah, C for sure. I'm sorry. I see. Just the fact that you can hit compile and get a result in 30 seconds instead of 3 minutes, and the software has the greatest debugging tool in the world. I'll tell you what that is: printf.
Right, in Verilog.
I've never used it. There is no printf.
There's no printf, right? But isn't there a simulator? Can't you simulate things and then you can look at look at the signals or something?
I've never gotten the simulator to really work correctly, and it really misses a lot of the intricacies and nuances that you would see once in the actual physical hardware on the physical hardware. So I've never used a simulator.
Okay.
The closest I've got is LEDs. There's no printf, but you can flash 4 LEDs. That's how you debug the whole design.
Awesome. Printf. Yes, printf. So that would be like so okay, no printf in Verilog. So here's the thing. Let's move on to some gaming questions. And this might be very difficult for you since you don't play games anymore. But still, we're just going to ask them. All right, we got to ask some questions. Okay. Single player or multiplayer?
Yeah, I'm a single player guy. I had no friends as a kid.
Wait, but are there retro games? Wait, are there retro games that are multiplayer?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, plenty, yeah.
Oh, really? Like Niema, which one? Niema, you know some? Like,
I mean, so there's a few different types. I mean, you can have like the ones where it's taking turns, or there's like the old school brawlers where you have like multiple people playing at the same time, where you're just kind of all beating stuff up at the same time. But yeah, I agree though. I'm more of a single player as well.
Single player. Okay. Single player. Okay. What about favorite game? I don't even know if this is a good question or not.
I'll just answer that. Actually, Mario 3, that's the game I played the most as a childhood. It's just therapeutic to play it because I can just kind of play it without really thinking. It's all muscle memory.
Wow. Amazing. Awesome.
Not Test Suite 240p? It's not your favorite game?
It's,
Wait, I need to try this game out. Test Suite 3. Yeah. Okay, afterwards, please put a link. Wait, is this, by the way, is this a game that where do you get this game? Is it on a particular console or are you just like?
It's basically, it's a ROM. It's like, downloading a ROM for an emulator.
Oh, no, but is it, but for example, if you're testing out a Nintendo system, there's a Nintendo version of this game,
yeah, there's one for the Nintendo Genesis, a bunch of different platforms because, you want to test the video output of many different consoles. And the developer Artemio and his team, they were kind enough to release it for a bunch of different platforms, and it's been instrumental, I think, for myself and many other people in this community.
Okay, I need to look this up. I'm gonna try to find an emulator, maybe an emulator in the browser. I need to look at this now. Like you've made me so great. Please put a link. Someone find this.
You missed it. I think Artemio was in the chat earlier, so you missed him. You could have.
What? He was in the chat.
The original source. I think so.
Yeah, I think I did see him flash by. I'm sorry, I had to turn on the lights because the camera was just going nuts.
Yeah, the camera was going nuts.
But we went from light to night, I guess.
I know. That's why I did it. We all had our own issues. Niema somehow is the only person who doesn't seem.
I had to run off and turn on my lights because mine was also getting super.
No, well, I had the sun coming out. It became all green because of the green screen thing. Okay. Let's see. Wait, where were we? Okay. So now let's move on to let's move on to some. We're gonna get past the gaming ones now, but still on the favorites topic. Favorite number?
0.
0?
Yeah,
I love 0.
0 is a simple number. Yeah.
0 is awesome. I would immediately pick either 0 or 1. I don't know which one, but those seem to be awesome. Pi is also pretty cool though. Pi is pretty awesome.
Pi,
okay.
E, yep.
What? E?
E, yeah.
Okay, Mac or PC?
Definitely Mac.
So by the way, does it matter which for all these kind of Verilog tools and all the FPGA tools, does it matter which one is one better supported than the other?
Oh yeah, none of it works on the Mac. Absolutely none of it.
Wait, what just happened? Wait, hold on. So none of it works on the Mac, and you're like, oh, you prefer Mac because?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
For sure, because they're for many reasons, and it changes over time. But I'd say the latest one, and I'll tell you why. I just went on a trip to visit my parents. I had the M1 MacBook Air. It never overheated. I used it for 3 days without charging because the battery life's that good, and it runs faster than a PC that overheats. So I'm happy.
Got it. So you like the Macs, but for your work, you actually have to use
Yeah, I keep an old desktop around.
I see. Got it. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're gonna go to some food related ones. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Pancake or waffle?
Waffle.
waffle. You did not even hesitate. Niema, did you see that? He didn't even like. It was like
No
he looked at
flinching,
me.
yeah.
He looked at me. He almost like gave me a disapproving, like, yeah, of course. Like,
why would you even ask this?
I mean, you need the little squares to like go the syrup and stuff, right?
Right.
It's
the
just
syrup
kind of
pouches.
exactly. Yeah.
That is a good point.
100%. Yep.
Totally agree. Actually, you do bring up a good point. But you don't get. Yeah, that is a good point. I did
It's
not.
The mind of an engineer. He knows.
The little receptacles for the syrup. That is a very, very good point. Although, hold on, just 1 second. Let me ask a follow up here because I do the butter situation. Somehow I think that it's easier to spread butter on a pancake than on a waffle, because the waffle with all the grooves, isn't it harder? Or it doesn't matter. You don't put butter. You're like, it's all.
I can see that, but I'm not a butter guy. I'm more of a syrup guy.
But can you see that if you wanted to put butter on it, might be easier for the pancake?
I can see that because you're spreading it over smoothers. I mean, yeah,
smoother.
Sure,
surface.
if you're a butter guy, probably might prefer pancakes.
Okay, good. Okay, so you prefer the waffle because of the syrup. Good point. Okay, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Tea. Okay. We got 2 more questions and then we're gonna be done. Okay, CRT or LCD? Ooh. Starting to get
loaded question.
Sorry,
it's a loaded question. And I'm gonna give you an answer, and it's not because I'm biased at selling devices that work with LCDs. In my heart, I would say CRTs. However, I can't play on them because the imperfections will drive me crazy, and I end up just doing things that try and make the image more straight or more converged, and it's just endless. And I get upset because I know the CRT I have, I'm never going to get perfection, and every year that goes by, it's going to age, and I don't have the ability to open it up and service it because I'm going to zap myself, and it just drives me crazy. So I can never play on it. I have to play on an LCD.
Got it. So actually, so interesting. So you're that was a great answer. By the way, Niema, you had a question. I can't even say the question you had. The one about the.
Yeah.
Niema, you should ask this. I actually don't even understand the question. I'm actually apologies for all the people in the chat.
So when you play for yourself, do you prefer sharp pixels or do you prefer scan lines?
I actually prefer, for the most part, sharp pixels with a little bit of blur. I think it's just simpler. Because the problem is once you start trying to apply scanline effects, it's back to the same. I'm going to keep tweaking it and try to make it, and it just gets sidetracked.
So with some blur though, that's interesting. Okay, very cool.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, simple.
Okay, now we are down to the last question. Please, folks, stay with us. Last question. If you didn't become an EE-PhD, so you didn't get your EE-PhD, somehow you were not allowed to do it, or you just couldn't do it, or something, that was not part of your life, what would you have become?
That's a good question.
And this is the last one. You can think a little bit about it. This is not, I know it's rapid fire, but like, what is your, what would be an alternate thing? And don't tell me a game. I mean, I guess you could say a retro gamer. But
yeah. I honestly don't know. I couldn't imagine not building stuff. Yeah, I am sorry. I really can't answer that question because pretty much my entire life has been something engineering related. From the very beginning, I was never really exposed to doing much of anything else.
What about building things that are not? So you could basically build like maybe build other things, right? I mean, like with the but I guess you really like the kind of the engineering aspect of putting things together and all that stuff.
Yeah. I'm not very mechanically inclined. That's why I'm kind of useless at work these days because the mechies have taken over. So I can't not do anything in that realm, like anything from mechanical engineering to architecture, not doing that. So that kind of rules out the other half of building. Got it.
That makes sense. Let's finish with one more since this is let's do one. Niema had a good one. About cereal. What was the cereal thing?
Oh,
this is going to be a quick one, but this is like immediate reaction. You cannot think about it long. This is like almost like you got to say right away, yes or no, or yes or no. Yes, it's a yes or no question, right?
Yeah.
And there's no debating, no thing. It's just like right away.
Just instant.
Gut reaction, instinct. You have like literally how much are we giving him?
Instant.
Instant.
Zero lag.
Zero
just
lag.
Like the devices he aims to produce. Is cereal a cold soup?
No.
Touché.
That is so hard. I don't even know what. But wait, but cereal with milk, you mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is such
You
a
eat
hard
cereal
one.
without milk?
Yeah.
What?
What do you mean? Yeah. Hey, yeah, no, I mean, so for example, Cheerios, we bring a lot of times Cheerios for a snack. You put them in a little Ziploc bag, bring them around, right? It's yeah.
I'll tell you why I gave you an instant answer. I think maybe, I guess maybe this is a Chinese thing, but to a Chinese person, soup's got to be hot. So he said cold. I'm like, yeah.
So he's really saying that cold soup is almost like an oxymoron.
Cold soup is not a soup, exactly.
It's like saying a modern retro game. Wait, a modern retro game? What is that? There's no such thing as a modern retro game. A retro game's got to be a retro game.
I mean, I like gazpacho, but you know, I guess to my mind, that's something. It's in its own class.
Phenomenal. Well, you know what, Mike? It was fantastic to have you here, and really impressed by your stuff. I love your answer. You are an EE person. Die hard. Like there's like no other thing, and that's very impressive. And I really really you're inspirational in that way. Also, what you've done is amazing, right? I mean, like the kind of stuff that you do. The following that you have, really, really amazing. Folks, give on the chat, please give Mike a great round of what is it, virtual applause or a cheer, because it's fantastic. We're super excited that you came here to spend some time with us, and everyone in the chat, very excited to have you here. We will bid you farewell for tonight, and we will see you at some other point in a Thursday evening. In the next few weeks. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you all, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.